There comes a moment when silence starts speaking louder than words, when everything you once warned people about begins to unfold right in front of their eyes and they can no longer pretend it was nothing. The same people who laughed, ignored, or doubted, you are now watching events connect exactly the way you described, and what once sounded like overthinking now feels like a warning they should have taken seriously. And in that moment, something shifts, because they are not just shocked by what is happening, they are shocked that you saw it coming long before it arrived. You tried to speak when it mattered. You tried to make them see what was building beneath the surface, but they were too comfortable to listen, too distracted to care, and too sure of their own version of reality to consider yours. Now that reality is breaking apart. Your words are coming back to them like echoes they cannot escape, and the most unsettling part is not the situation itself, but the realization that you were not guessing, you were aware. Lesson 1. You saw what others refused to see. Deep version. What made you different was never just intelligence. It was a deeper level of awareness that allowed you to notice what others kept overlooking. Because while most people were focused on what felt comfortable, what looked normal, and what helped them fit in, you were paying attention to the small details, the repeated patterns, the subtle shifts in behavior that did not match what people were saying on the surface. And even when everything seemed fine to everyone else, something inside you kept telling you that things were not as stable or as honest as they appeared. And that feeling did not come from overthinking, but from a quiet clarity that most people are not used to trusting. When you tried to express what you were seeing, people dismissed you, not because you were wrong, but because accepting your perspective would have forced them to question their own reality, their choices, and the people around them. And most people would rather protect their comfort than face something that creates doubt. So they laughed it off, ignored it, or labeled it as negativity just to avoid dealing with it. But the truth does not disappear just because it is ignored. It continues to build quietly through repeated signs and hidden consequences until it reaches a point where it becomes impossible to deny. And now that everything is unfolding, they are being forced to face what you already accepted long ago, while you remain steady, not because you are unaffected, but because you already went through the phase of confusion, doubt, and realization before it ever became obvious to anyone else. Lesson 2. They laughed because they felt exposed. When people laughed at you, dismissed your words, or made you feel like you were exaggerating, it may have seemed like they thought you were wrong or foolish, but in reality their reaction was coming from a much deeper place of discomfort, because the truth you were speaking was touching areas they were not ready to face within themselves. And instead of dealing with that discomfort honestly, they chose the easier path of turning you into the problem so they could protect their own sense of control and normalcy. When someone points out something real that others are trying to ignore, it creates a kind of pressure, because it forces people to either reflect or resist, and most people choose to resist, not because they are bad, but because facing truth often requires change, accountability, and letting go of illusions they have become attached to. So instead of looking inward, they laugh, they mock, or they distance themselves, hoping that by doing so they can silence the discomfort you created in them. But what they did not realize is that their reaction was actually confirming the very thing you were pointing out. Because people only react that strongly when something hits close to the truth. And now that everything is unfolding in front of them, they can no longer hide behind those reactions, and they are beginning to understand that what they once laughed at was never a joke. It was a warning they were not ready to hear at the time. Lesson 3. Truth is revealed with purpose. What is happening right now may look chaotic on the surface, but in reality nothing is random or meaningless, because truth does not reveal itself all at once without reason. It unfolds in stages and at the exact moment when it can no longer be hidden, controlled, or explained away, and the situations that people once ignored, justified, or kept buried are now coming forward in a way that forces clarity whether they are ready for it or not. There is always a period where things are allowed to continue quietly, where warning signs are present but not taken seriously, where patterns repeat but are overlooked, and during that time it may seem like nothing is happening or that things will just stay the same. But beneath the surface, everything is building toward a point of exposure, and when that point is reached, everything starts to make sense all at once, which is why for many people this moment feels overwhelming, confusing, and even frightening, because they are being forced to process in real time what they avoided for so long, while you are standing in a completely different position because you were shown glimpses of this earlier, not so you could feel ahead of others, but so you could be mentally and emotionally prepared for what was coming. This is why you are able to remain more grounded while others feel shaken, because you have already gone through the phase of questioning, understanding, and accepting. And now you are simply witnessing what you already recognized before it became obvious. And this is the deeper truth most people do not understand, that timing matters. Because if everything were revealed too early, people would deny it. And if it were revealed too late, the damage would be complete. So it unfolds at the moment when it carries the greatest impact and the clearest lesson. And that is exactly where everything stands right now. In a moment where truth is no longer something that can be ignored, but something that must be faced. Lesson 4. Delay does not mean it won't happen. There was a time when even you started to question yourself, when nothing seemed to change and everything around you continued as if your concerns meant nothing. And in that silence, it became easy to wonder whether you had misunderstood what you were seeing, or whether you were thinking too deeply about something simple. Because when results are delayed, the mind naturally starts looking for doubt. But what you are witnessing now is proof that delay does not mean something is untrue. It simply means it is unfolding at the right time, because real consequences, real exposure, and real truth often take time to build before they become visible. And this pattern is not new. It has existed throughout history, even in the lives of the prophets, where truth was rejected, delayed, and ignored before it finally became undeniable. For example, the story of Prophet Noah, peace be upon him, shows this clearly, as he warned his people for many years, calling them to reflect and change, but they mocked him, ignored him, and continued living as if nothing would ever happen. And for a long time it must have looked like his warnings had no effect and that nothing would change. But when the flood finally came, it was no longer something they could deny. It was the result of years of ignored truth becoming reality all at once. In the same way, Prophet Musa, peace be upon him, stood against Pharaoh and warned him repeatedly. Yet Pharaoh continued in arrogance, believing nothing would challenge his power. And for a time, it may have seemed like that arrogance would continue without consequence. But eventually, the truth prevailed, and the consequences arrived in a way that could not be avoided or reversed. These examples show that delay is often part of a greater process, not a sign that something is false. Because if everything happened instantly, people would not reflect. They would react. But when there is time, when there are repeated chances and warnings, the final outcome carries a deeper lesson and a stronger impact. And this is exactly what you are seeing now, because what once seemed distant or unlikely is now unfolding in front of everyone, leaving no space for excuses or denial. And while others are struggling to understand how things reach this point, you are able to remain steady because you now realize that what you sensed earlier was not wrong. It was simply ahead of its time, and this moment is not sudden. It is the result of a long process finally reaching its conclusion. Lesson 5. Your silence became your strength. There came a point in your journey where you slowly started to realize that no matter how clearly you explained things, no matter how calmly you tried to make others understand, and no matter how many signs you pointed out, some people were simply not ready to see what you were seeing. And that realization changed the way you moved, because instead of continuing to speak into spaces where your words were being dismissed, twisted, or ignored, you made a quiet but powerful decision to step back, to observe more and say less. And in that moment, what may have felt like isolation or even defeat at first actually became one of the greatest shifts in your strength, because silence, when chosen with awareness, is not weakness. It is control, it is discipline, and it is a form of power that most people never truly understand. While others continued to talk, argue, defend themselves, and create noise to maintain their version of reality, you removed yourself from that cycle, and by doing so, you stopped feeding energy into something that was not ready to change, which allowed you to protect your clarity and your peace at the same time. And although it may have felt uncomfortable in the beginning, because speaking up had once felt like your responsibility, you eventually began to understand that not every truth needs to be forced onto people, because some lessons are only understood through experience, not explanation. As time passed, your silence started to transform from something that felt like holding back into something that felt like standing firm, because you were no longer reacting to every misunderstanding or trying to correct every false perception. Instead, you were allowing things to unfold naturally, trusting that reality itself would reveal what words could not. And this is where your strength deepened in a way that most people around you could not even recognize, because they were still operating from a place where they believed that being loud meant being right, that defending themselves constantly meant they were in control, and that convincing others was the only way to prove truth. But you had moved beyond that. You had reached a point where you understood that truth does not need to fight to exist, it does not need constant validation, and it does not lose its value just because people refuse to accept it in the moment. Instead, truth has its own timing, its own way of revealing itself, and when that time comes, it becomes undeniable without you having to say anything at all. What makes this even more powerful is that your silence was not passive. It was not a form of giving up, and it was not you shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. It was a conscious choice to stop engaging in cycles that drained your energy and distorted your message, because every time you tried to explain something to people who were committed to misunderstanding you, you were not only exhausting yourself, you were also placing your clarity in a position where it could be questioned unnecessarily. And over time, you began to see that constantly defending your perspective in front of the wrong audience does not strengthen your truth, it weakens your peace. And that is when you started to protect your energy more carefully, choosing when to speak and when to remain silent, not out of fear but out of wisdom. There is also a deeper psychological layer to this, because when you stopped explaining yourself, you removed the comfort people had in dismissing you, since as long as you were speaking, they could interrupt, argue, or twist your words to fit their narrative. But once you became silent, that control disappeared, and suddenly they were left alone with their own thoughts, their own actions, and the unfolding reality around them. And this created a different kind of pressure, one that did not come from you, but from within themselves, because now there was no one to argue with, no one to blame, and no one to silence. And in that space, the truth you once tried to explain started revealing itself through real situations, real consequences, and real outcomes. And that kind of realization hits much deeper than any conversation ever could. As everything begins to unfold exactly as you once saw it, your silence has taken on an entirely new meaning, because without you needing to remind anyone, without you needing to point fingers or repeat your warnings, everything is speaking for you. And this is the kind of power that cannot be imitated or forced, because it is built on patience, awareness, and trust in the process, rather than the need for immediate validation. People who once dismissed you are now forced to remember what you said, But this time they are not hearing it as an opinion, they are seeing it as reality. And that shift changes everything, because it removes the option of denial and replaces it with understanding, even if that understanding comes with discomfort or regret. It is important to recognize that this level of silence requires inner strength, because it is not easy to hold back when you know you are right. It is not easy to watch people misunderstand you without correcting them. And it is not easy to step away from situations where you feel the need to be heard. But the fact that you were able to do that shows a level of discipline that goes far beyond surface-level awareness. Because you were not driven by ego, you were driven by clarity, and that clarity allowed you to prioritize long-term truth over short-term validation, which is something most people struggle with deeply. Your silence also protected you in ways you may not have fully realized at the time, because by not constantly expressing everything you saw, you avoided unnecessary conflict, unnecessary attention, and unnecessary resistance. And this gave you the space to observe more, to understand more, and to grow stronger internally without being pulled into distractions that would have slowed you down. And in that quiet space, you developed a kind of confidence that does not rely on external agreement, a kind of certainty that does not need to be proven through argument, and a kind of peace that remains steady even when everything around you begins to shift. Now that everything is coming to light, your silence is no longer seen as absence. It is seen as depth, it is seen as control, and it is seen as something that others are starting to recognize but still do not fully understand, because they are only now experiencing what you already processed long ago. And while they may feel the urge to react, to explain, or to make sense of everything quickly, you are able to remain grounded because your journey through this situation started much earlier than theirs. And that difference in timing is what gives you stability in a moment that feels unstable to everyone else. This is why your silence became your strength, not because you said nothing, but because you knew when speaking would not change anything, and you trusted that truth does not need to be forced in order to be revealed. And now, without effort, without confrontation, and without noise, everything is unfolding in a way that confirms what you already understood, showing you that sometimes the strongest position is not the one that speaks the loudest, but the one that remains steady and allows reality to speak on its behalf. Lesson 6. They are more shocked by you than the situation. What is truly unsettling for people right now is not just the situation unfolding in front of them, but the realization that you saw it coming long before it became obvious. Because while they are trying to process the events, connect the dots, and make sense of what is happening, they are also being forced to confront something even more uncomfortable, which is the fact that you were standing in front of them with clarity while they were surrounded by confusion. And that contrast is what creates the deeper shock, because it challenges the way they used to see you, the way they judged you, and the assumptions they made about your awareness. For a long time, they may have placed you in a category that felt safe to them. Someone who was overthinking, someone who was too serious, someone who was reading too much into things. And by doing that, they were able to dismiss your perspective without having to examine it closely. But now that everything is unfolding exactly as you described, that old perception no longer holds, and they are left with a new understanding that is difficult to accept, because it means they were not seeing you clearly at all. This kind of realization does more than just change their opinion about a situation. It forces them to question their own judgment, because if they were so confident in dismissing you before, and now they see that you were right, it creates a gap between what they believed and what is real. And that gap can be deeply uncomfortable, because it exposes the limits of their awareness and the ways in which they may have ignored signs that were right in front of them. And in that moment, the focus shifts from the situation itself to you, because you become the example of what it looks like to see clearly when others do not. and that is not easy for people to accept, especially if they are not used to questioning their own perspective. There is also a deeper emotional layer to this reaction, because along with shock, there is often a sense of regret, even if it is not openly expressed, because they begin to remember the moments when you tried to speak, when you tried to explain, when you tried to warn them in your own way, and they realize that they had an opportunity to listen, to reflect, and to prepare, but they chose not to. And that realization can create a quiet tension within them, because now they are dealing not only with the consequences of the situation, but also with the awareness that things could have been different if they had taken you seriously earlier. Your presence starts to feel different to them, even if nothing about you has outwardly changed, because now they see you through a new lens, one where your words carry more weight, your observations feel more significant, and your silence feels more intentional. And this shift can be confusing for them, because it challenges the way they used to interact with you, as they can no longer approach you with the same level of dismissal or casual disregard, since reality itself has already confirmed that your perspective holds truth. This is where the dynamic begins to change, not because you demanded respect or tried to prove yourself, but because the unfolding events have naturally repositioned you in their minds. What makes this even more powerful is that you did not need to force this shift. You did not need to argue your way into being understood, and you did not need to constantly remind people of what you said, because the situation itself became your evidence. And that kind of validation is far more impactful than anything you could have expressed through words alone, because it removes the possibility of debate and replaces it with direct experience. And when people experience something for themselves, it reaches a level of understanding that cannot be easily dismissed or forgotten. It is important for you to remain aware of how you respond to this shift, because moments like this can easily lead to pride or the desire to prove a point, especially when you have been misunderstood for so long. But the real strength lies in staying grounded, in recognizing that your role was never to be validated by others, but to stay true to what you saw and understood. And now that this understanding is becoming visible to others, it does not change who you are, it simply reveals what was already there. If anything, this moment calls for more awareness, more restraint, and more clarity, because the way you carry yourself now will define how this shift continues to unfold. There is also a deeper lesson here about perception, because what people are experiencing is not just a change in how they see you, but a realization that they may have been limited by their own way of seeing things, and that realization can either open them up to growth or push them further into denial, depending on how they choose to respond. And while you cannot control that response, you can remain steady in your own position, understanding that awareness is not about being ahead of others, but about being aligned with truth, regardless of whether it is accepted or not. As everything continues to unfold, you may notice that people start paying more attention to what you say, even if they do not openly admit it. Because once someone has experienced a moment where your perspective proved accurate, it changes the way they listen. It creates a level of curiosity and caution at the same time, and while they may not fully understand how you see things the way you do, they can no longer ignore it completely, and that subtle shift in attention is part of the larger change that is taking place. What is happening is not just about being right or wrong, it is about the exposure of awareness itself, because through this situation, a clear difference has been revealed between seeing and overlooking, between observing and reacting, and between understanding early and understanding too late. And you happen to stand on the side of early awareness, not because you tried to be different, but because you allowed yourself to see without filtering reality through comfort or fear. And now that difference is visible to everyone, whether they are ready to accept it or not. Lesson 7. This is confirmation, not revenge. As everything begins to unfold exactly the way you once saw it, there is a very important shift you must understand within yourself, because moments like this can quietly pull a person in two very different directions, one toward ego and the other toward clarity. And the difference between those two paths will define not only who you become after this, but also how far your awareness can truly take you. It is completely natural, after being ignored, dismissed, or even made to feel like you were wrong for so long, to feel a sense of validation when reality finally proves your perspective right. And in that validation, there can be a subtle temptation to look back at others and feel a sense of superiority, to think about all the times you tried to explain yourself and were not heard, and to feel like now is the moment where everything balances out. But if you stay in that mindset, even for a short time, you risk turning a moment of truth into a moment of ego. And that is where many people lose the deeper meaning of what they have been given. Because the truth is, this moment was never meant to serve as your revenge. It was never meant to elevate you above others in a way that feeds pride, and it was never meant to become a tool for proving people wrong. Instead, it is something much more meaningful and much more powerful. It is confirmation. Confirmation that your awareness was real, that the clarity you felt was not imagination, that the discomfort you experienced when things did not feel right had a purpose, and that the patience you showed by stepping back and allowing things to unfold was not wasted. This kind of confirmation is rare, because many people go through life questioning their instincts, doubting their perception, and relying only on what others tell them is true. But you have now experienced something that shows you the value of trusting what you see when it comes from a place of sincerity and reflection. And that is not something to take lightly or turn into something small like proving a point. When you look at this moment with the right perspective, you begin to see that it is not about the people who doubted you, it is about the responsibility that comes with seeing clearly. Because awareness is not just a gift, it is also a test of how you handle truth, how you carry yourself when others begin to recognize what you already knew, and how you choose to move forward when the situation shifts in your favor. It would be easy to let this moment harden your heart, to become distant, to feel like you are above engaging with others, or to silently hold on to the idea that you were right and they were wrong. But that approach limits your growth and reduces a powerful experience into something narrow and personal, when in reality, this moment has a much broader meaning. If you reflect deeply, you will realize that being right was never the end goal. It was only a part of a larger process that was shaping your patience, your discipline, and your ability to stand firm without needing constant validation, because the real strength you developed was not in seeing what others could not see. It was in how you handled that awareness when it was not accepted, how you stayed grounded when your perspective was questioned, and how you resisted the urge to constantly defend yourself in situations where it would not have made a difference. Now that everything is becoming clear, that same strength is required in a different way, not in holding back your words, but in holding your ego in check, in staying balanced, and in remembering that clarity should lead to growth, not pride. There is also an important emotional layer to this moment, because while you may feel validated, others around you may be experiencing confusion, regret, or even quiet embarrassment as they begin to realize what they overlooked. And how you respond to that matters, because if you approach them with an attitude of, "I told you so," even if it is unspoken, it can create distance and resistance. But if you remain calm, grounded, and focused on understanding rather than proving, it allows space for a different kind of interaction, one where growth becomes possible instead of defensiveness. This does not mean you ignore what happened or pretend that everything is the same. It simply means you choose to operate from awareness rather than reaction, which is what has set you apart from the beginning. This confirmation should strengthen your trust in your own perception but in a balanced way. Because while it shows you that your awareness has value, it also reminds you to stay humble and open, to continue observing, learning, and refining how you understand situations, because no one sees everything perfectly, and growth comes from staying grounded even when you are right. This is where many people make a mistake. They experience a moment of being right and begin to assume that they will always be right. And that shift from awareness to certainty can slowly lead them away from the very clarity that once guided them. So it is important to remain mindful, to keep your perspective sharp but flexible, and to remember that awareness is something that needs to be maintained, not something that can be taken for granted. Another deeper layer of this lesson is understanding that not everyone will respond to this moment in the same way. Some people will quietly recognize that you were right and begin to respect your perspective more. Others may still resist internally, even if the truth is clear. And some may try to reinterpret the situation in a way that protects their ego. And all of these reactions are part of human nature. But none of them should distract you from your own path. Because your role was never to control how others respond. It was to remain aligned with what you understood. And that alignment is what has brought you to this point. If you start focusing too much on how others react, you risk losing the clarity that allowed you to see things early in the first place. This is also a moment where you can recognize how much you have changed internally, because the version of you who first noticed these patterns may have felt the need to explain, to convince, or to seek agreement. But the version of you now understands that truth does not depend on acceptance to exist, and that shift is significant, because it means you are no longer dependent on external validation to feel secure in your understanding, and that independence is a form of strength that goes beyond this single situation. It becomes part of how you move through life in general. As you move forward, this experience should serve as a foundation rather than a conclusion, because there will be other moments where you notice things before others do, where you feel that same sense of awareness guiding you. And now you have something to refer back to, a real example that shows you the value of trusting that awareness, while also handling it with patience and discipline. This is how growth continues, not by holding on to the past and replaying it, but by using it as a reference point for how you approach the future. This moment is not about proving that you were right. It is about understanding why you were able to see what you saw and how you can carry that awareness forward without letting it turn into pride or distance. Because the strongest position is not the one that stands above others, but the one that remains grounded while everything around it shifts. And if you can hold on to that balance, then this confirmation becomes more than just a moment. It becomes a turning point in how you understand yourself, your awareness, and the responsibility that comes with it. And that is something far more valuable than any sense of temporary validation or revenge could ever be. Conclusion: the real meaning of everything you've seen. As everything settles and you look back at the path that brought you here, you begin to understand that none of this was ever just about being right, or being ahead of others, or proving what you saw in the past, because those are only surface-level interpretations of something much deeper that has been unfolding within you all along. What you went through was a process of awareness, patience, and inner strengthening, where you learn to trust what you see, even when no one else validates it, to stay calm when others misunderstand you, and to remain steady when situations around you did not make sense in the moment. Now that things are becoming clear, it is easy to focus on the external validation, on the fact that people are starting to recognize what you once said. But the real meaning of this experience is not found in how others respond. It is found in how you have changed internally through it all. Because if you look closely, you will realize that the strongest part of your journey was never the moment when events proved you right, but the long period before that, when you had to sit with uncertainty, when you had to trust your own perception without confirmation, and when you had to remain silent even when you felt misunderstood. And that stage is where your real strength was built, not in reaction, but in restraint, not in argument, but in observation, and not in proving others wrong, but in holding your own understanding without needing it to be accepted immediately. That is what separates a reactive mindset from a grounded one, and that is the real transformation that has taken place within you. Now, as you move forward, this experience should not become something you carry as pride or proof against others, but something you carry as clarity about yourself, because awareness is not meant to create distance or superiority. It is meant to create understanding, patience, and responsibility in how you see and respond to life. There will always be moments where you notice things before others, where you feel patterns others miss, and where you sense direction long before it becomes visible. But what matters most is how you handle that awareness, whether you use it to grow quietly or to seek validation loudly, because one leads to stability and the other leads back into confusion. So the real conclusion is simple but powerful. You were not just observing others, you were also being shaped yourself. And what you thought was only about understanding people around you was also about understanding your own mind, your own patience, and your own ability to remain balanced in situations where clarity takes time to arrive. And now that you have reached this point, the most important step is not to look backward with emotion, but to move forward with awareness, carrying what you have learned in silence, strength, and humility. Knowing that real understanding does not need to announce itself, it simply reflects in the way you live, think, and respond from this moment onward.